You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Welcome into this edition of Inside Automotive. From acquisitions to shifting consumer preferences, on today's show we're discussing factors driving M&A activity as highlighted in the Blue Sky report published by Kerrigan Advisors. Joining us now is Ryan Kerrigan, Managing Director of Kerrigan Advisors. Welcome to the show, Ryan. So good to catch up with you. How have you been?
Thanks, Jim. Good to be here. It's been a little while and good to see you.
Sure. So, with record profits in the U.S. automotive retail sector in recent years, why am I reading all about these international transactions on part of the U.S. auto retailers? What are they taking their money over the border now? And
fascinating, right? Here we've got this booming industry in the U.S. and yet you were reading about these international acquisitions. And so just this past week, Group 1 announced the purchase of Inchcape Retail, which is a big UK retailer. This comes off of, for example, Pendragon being bought by Lithia, Penske doing acquisitions last year.
Sure.
And, ultimately, they're just getting much better deals in Europe right now. There's some real headwinds in Europe, the UK in particular. And it's kind of a testament, honestly, to the strength of the valuation of the dealerships in the United States. Dealerships are expensive. Sellers are benefiting from selling in the United States right now. And the publics are not all that active in the United States. And we can talk more about that. But they are shifting very big dollars to Europe in this case.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And to hit on perhaps another tough topic, what's going on with EVs? I was at a conference just yesterday that was all about EVs. Dealers are trying to figure it out. OEMs are trying to figure it out. Consumers just haven't been there in force in any great numbers, although the numbers are increasing, but at a very slow rate, right?
Well, really slow. I mean, I think we can kind of formally declare an end to this sort of growth engine, if you will, and big transformation. Yeah. And it's not to say, and we certainly don't judge where we're going 5 and 10 years out, but this notion of this immediate top-down switch to EVs, which I know you and I have been very skeptical of over the years.
Yep.
It's not going to happen. So you look, for example, at Q4, growth got down to under 1%. This is not an exciting growth sector.
No.
And here, for example, in Q1, growth was 3.3% in terms of unit sales, but that was substantially less than the US market. So EVs actually lost market share in Q1.
That's right.
So this notion that there's going to be this very significant wholesale shift, that ICE is on its way out anytime soon, simply not going to happen. This is going to be, at best, a very long transition, and regulators are already starting to signal that they get it. It's perhaps not what some of the folks wanted, but they're already starting to delay some of these mandates and all that kind of thing. So I think if you look back at some of the discussions that you and I had in recent years, it's playing out exactly as you and I would have thought.
And what's interesting is that, I know we talked about it too, as you mentioned, but a couple of years ago, Toyota was being kind of chastised from the rest of the people in the industry going, come on, how come you're not building enough EVs? What's going on there? Yeah. At the end of the day, Toyota got it right. They said, hey, you guys, you're way off on this thing. The consumers just aren't there in any, mass, situation yet to be buying these EVs. We're going to take a little bit slower approach and build plug-in hybrids and others, and that seems to be kind of the magic formula, right?
No question. Toyota at the time, they were out of step, but frankly looked quite wise. Yeah. They've been proven right up to this point. There's no question that sort of an all of the above, all in kind of approach.
Sure.
Toyota took the perspective of kind of where the consumer was at, the cost of producing EVs, frankly, the environmental impact of EVs. I mean, they were taking a very holistic approach. And to your point, they did get some real pushback, but they're positioned really well right now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so shifting back to what we always talk to you about, and that's the buy-sell market. How is it faring today?
Well, hey, the buy-sell market, we just put out the year-end numbers for 2023, a record year for buy-sell activity. Wow. 397 transactions were done last year. That actually sets a record over the prior peak, which was in 2021. So this incredible period of activity continues. 680 franchises traded hands last year, just to give you a sense. So you've got this, 100-year-old industry. You've got these, continued involvement of families and multi-generation, and yet you're seeing that level of turnover. Sure. So really substantial.
What would that number look like if we were in 2018? Like if you were to compare a 2018 or 2017 to the 685 franchises that turned?
The number I can give you is of the 397 transactions last year in 2017 or 2018, that would have been closer to 200, 225.
Wow.
So roughly a doubling.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's incredible, incredible. Interest rates have not held back activity either. Financing costs have certainly increased a lot. Talk to us about that. That's a lot of cash out.
Yeah, no, I mean, hey, when you got a Fed funds rates going up 500 basis points in a period of a year and a half, that should really impact buy-sell activity.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it didn't. Now, it did do it across the U.S. economy. If you look at mergers and acquisitions activity across the U.S., down 35% in 2023.
Yeah.
So it did impact it in a very meaningful way. Why are we different? We think we're different for two reasons. One, still lots of private to private transactions. Folks who are doing their financing locally, they're not as tied to what's going on in the money centers and Wall Street and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the biggest driver is that if you look at 2020 to 2022 profitability for the industry, dealers raked in $230 billion in pre-tax profits.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of that money is now working its way back into the buy-sell market.
Right.
So they don't need financing. So rates may have gone up. The banks may be a little bit less likely to lend.
Yeah.
But with that kind of cash, and even with all of that said, debt ratios are still way below today for the average dealer what they were pre-COVID. They're about 40% less. So there's still a lot of capacity. Dealers' balance sheets are really strong right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So speaking of which, in terms of balance sheets, profits, trending down because of obviously rising inventories. We're seeing, pre-COVID inventories back in a big way. And talk to us about that.
Yeah. So on average, the industry is down about 26% last year. So these are still pretty elevated profits. These are very strong profits, but no question there's a bit of a retrenchment. That said, in our observation, we see statements across the country, across all kinds of dealer groups, and the dispersion around the mean is massive. We see statements with profitability down 50% or more. We see a lot of dealers that are down more modestly, more in line with kind of industry average.
Yeah.
We see some folks that are very much in line. And frankly, I was looking at some statements yesterday with a pretty significant uptick in 2024 over 2023. And so it's just, I'd say that depending upon where you're playing, the region you're at, and frankly, how you operate your business, you're seeing really, really wide dispersion around some of those numbers. But across the industry, yes, we are pulling back a bit on profits.
Yeah. We kind of saw that coming, right? So
And the publics, for example, I'll just say the publics are just coming out with data yesterday and today, for example, and most of the publics for Q1 in 2024 down 10 to 20% sort of year over year. So they're sort of showing that general industry trend as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's all expected. I mean, nothing shocking there, right?
Well, and hey, I would suggest that if we could stay at these levels, which again represent a really significant improvement over where we were pre-2020, I think we take it all day long.
That's right. So today, how are dealerships being valued? I mean, with all of these different factors that you mentioned, when it comes time to put a value on that dealership, how do you do it? What data are you pulling?
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of going back to the way we used to do it. I mean, there's that really kind of weird period of COVID where we had these surging earnings, and we look at pre-COVID and post-COVID and average them and do all of these sort of workarounds trying to figure out what is appropriate value.
Yeah.
Today, we're looking at trailing 12 months. We're going kind of back to the way we used to do it. So lots and lots of factors when it comes to valuation. But I think the single biggest factor today is the traditional metric, and that is a good adjusted earnings analysis and looking back at the prior year or the prior 12 months and saying that's a pretty darn good gauge of where you're going to come out in terms of value. Yeah,
for sure. Are buyers still looking at pre-pandemic earnings? Are part of the valuation assessment, I would imagine, to determine blue sky value?
Less so.
Okay.
On occasion, we will get a request to look at pre-COVID earnings. I think at this point, it's really more of a curiosity. Sellers have moved on. The industry has moved on. You can look, for example, at profitability in 2018 and 2019, but the rest of the P&L is not going to reflect that period of time. I mean, the world has just changed very, very dramatically. So much less so. We, for example, in our current offerings are not putting 2019, for example, in the books, and that's looking back now 5 years in a different world. So I think the industry's moved on.
Yeah, and then there's those buyers out there that because they've got so much cash right now, that if they wanted a Toyota store or they want a Porsche store in their lineup, or maybe they want a Benz store, that I don't want to say they throw the book away, but it becomes a little bit more of an emotional. I've got a friend of mine that just bought a Mercedes-Benz store. He's like, I had to have a Mercedes-Benz store. So do you find that to be the case too, that when these people really let their emotions, dictate their next move, and they've got a plethora of cash on hand, that they go, yeah, maybe this store is $40 million. The guy wants $50 million. I'll pay it all day long because I want that store in my lineup.
Yeah. Well, I think that some of that emotion and some of it may be a little irrational, but I also think there's some rationality to it as well.
Sure.
So for example, if you're not in with a really key brand, if Toyota is part of your future and you're not in that family yet, it might be maybe a little emotional, but also rational to sort of overpay.
Good point.
Get into the Toyota family. Porsche, for example, I believe 198 franchises in the U.S., if I remember correctly. They don't come up that often. I mean, you're going to have to step up. And now, kind of like an NFL franchise, most dealers are not waiting for their local Porsche store to become available if that's what they want. They're willing to look nationally. They'll go to a state that they're not in to get a Porsche store, for example. So, I think there's an element of emotion to some of these franchises, but I think a lot of it is just sort of making sure that they're representing their brand family well within their dealership group, and reaching particularly to get into franchises that they're not yet in. So I would give them maybe a little more credit on the rationality side of things, but I get it. It's fun to own a Porsche store.
So talk to us about what are the hottest markets? Is it still the traditional Florida and Texas and such?
No question. And this just reflects U.S. trends. But if you look at the economics, you look at population, you look at where people want to live, where they want to vacation, it's the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast. And so by far the most active market, over 40% of buy-sell activity is in the Southeast of the United States. So that remains very, very strong, and certainly where we're most active as a firm, although we certainly do work nationally. The West Coast has tailed off. There's no question. I think some of the policies and maybe some of the population and demographic issues of the coastal states. So we're seeing less activity in the West Coast. And interesting, the Midwest has popped up quite a bit. And so if you look at, for example, kind of national market share in the Midwest, in this past year for over prior years, it's up quite a bit.
Yeah, Colorado's become quite a hot spot for M&A, right?
Well, it did. Basically, everything that could sell did sell in Colorado. I believe it was in 2022. Something like 40% of franchises in the state sold. It was a big number. Don't quote me on that exactly, but a massive number. So that state, very attractive, great lifestyle state. Many dealers with second homes in a place like Colorado, and lots and lots of activity. So I think that's quieted down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And they've got a very liberal policy on EVs. I think they give an additional, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's like another $5,000 over and above the 7,500. So therefore, EV sales are doing pretty good there in that state. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you which franchises are trending right now. So the franchises that we are following, for example, BMW, we actually have put a positive outlook on BMW. They have really won the luxury sales race, for example. We'll come back to Mercedes in a minute. But BMW, really nice transition to EVs, for example. We've increased multiples on Honda and Mazda. So Honda and Mazda, for example, had really, really strong performance in 2023. Honda regained market share that it lost during COVID. And then Mazda actually doubled the pace of sales over the U.S. automotive market in 2023. So we actually increased multiples on Honda and Mazda. And we've got a positive outlook on BMW given their strong performance in the luxury segment. And when you look at Mazda's EV offering, it's almost nil, right? I mean, they don't really sell many EVs in the Mazda franchise.
They're late.
But
I think they're taking that's exactly right. I think they're taking a cautious approach to it. It's a smaller company. It's a smaller balance sheet. They couldn't announce the size of the EV programs and investments that were announced a few years ago by the major OEMs. And so I think they took a more cautious approach, perhaps out of necessity.
Yeah.
It hasn't hurt them at all. Again, they were up 13% year over year.
Yeah,
It's a good looking product line. The dealers express a lot of confidence in Mazda. They're rolling out their image compliant facilities across the country. And so you're seeing beautiful new image compliant Mazda stores throughout the country.
Yep.
I think they're in a really good place. We see positive things, and that's reflected in their multiple.
That's great. What are some of the others that might be dipping right now in terms of their popularity or their values?
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier. So Mercedes, for example, we took down their multiples a slight notch. At a time when the luxury market was quite strong. BMW showed very, very strong growth. Lexus was up 23% last year. Mercedes did not grow last year. They were up, they were basically in line. The switch to their EV product line has not gone nearly as well. There's been a lot of pushback on the style of the cars and the cost of the cars. And the other thing that we see in our side of things is that the relations with the dealer body are just not strong at this point. Mercedes is perceived as being too top down. Dealers are not on board with some of the transitions and what's going on in terms of product and leadership. They're just not in a good place. And so we see, I'd say, marginally less activity and less focus on Mercedes today than on, for example, their peers Lexus and BMW, which seem to be really sort of hitting in all strides.
Yeah, wow, very interesting, very interesting. So what are your expectations for 2024 in the buy-sell market?
Well, I'll start with what I know, which is the stuff that we're working on. And so really strong year in 2024. We've already announced some very significant transactions in the first quarter of the year. We're going to have a very strong year in 2024. I would imagine that overall activity is probably going to dip. There's no question there's a bit of a flight to quality. We do have to say no more today than we did, for example, the last couple of years. We'll have calls, we'll do consultations with dealers, and some combination of the performance, the brand, the location, the size. They're just going to be tougher to do today than they were in the last couple of years. So I'd say that we are probably saying no more today than we have the last couple of years. That said, we're still seeing lots of activity. But if I sort of extrapolate that to the broader market, my guess is a robust year, probably not a record year.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Ryan Kerrigan, Managing Director of Kerrigan Advisors with the Blue Sky Report. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. We very much appreciate it. I know a lot of our dealer viewers get a lot out of your visit with us, so thank you. And thank all of you for watching. Don't forget, all of our content is now available on Roku and Apple TV, so you're just as close as your remote at home. So thanks so much, Ryan. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.